So as most of us already know, the Zack Snyder Man of Steel film was the start of what we now know as the DC Extended Universe, but that wasn't always WB's first pick. With the Dark Knight trilogy already being so popular, they really wanted to expand the lore of that world, and they wanted Christian Bale to helm the lead of Batman vs Superman. But Bale and Nolan were not budging. They only wanted to do a trilogy, so when WB got that news, they were scrambling to find a hero who could pop off this large lore and world of DC. They really wanted to make sure they were competing with the MCU cinematic universe. So eventually WB landed on Green Lantern, and they wanted Ryan Reynolds of all people to play him. With the large world and lore and endless amount of stories that can be told with Green Lantern, plus Ryan Reynolds' charisma and comedic timing, WB along with the rest of the world thought, what could really go wrong? What's going on, y'all? It's your boy Eddie Knight, man. This is Nerdy Before It Was Cool, where we nerd out about TV and film, especially ones based on comic book characters. This video is the second in a segment I like to call, Is It Really That Bad? Where we go back and take a look over films that were destroyed by critics to try to determine that very question. Last episode was Marvel's Eternals, and Green Lantern was the second most voted on pick. And by the way, to participate in these polls, all you have to do is be subscribed to my channel. But if you want the real power of suggestion, consider joining the channel family or subscribing to Patreon. But with no further ado, let's get into the good stuff. The first thing I have to say that I really enjoyed was the pacing of the film. It was pretty zippy and it wasn't a very tough watch. A lot of films that you'll find in this segment, the pacing will be really off. There'll be these very long and large moments of just sluggish slowdowns, but that's not really a problem in this film. Secondly, the score is extremely underrated. I really liked Green Lantern's theme, Sinestro, and all the other side characters. Like, everybody's theme was really well put together, and it was probably one of the more memorable parts of the movie for me. And speaking of side characters, there was a lot of little tiny bits of lore and side characters in this film, whether it be the people in the Green Lantern Corps and Sinestro and those guys. But we also get Amanda Waller, played by Angela Bassett of all people, which was really dope. I just wish that she was used a little bit more. Amanda Waller is a really sneaky and conniving character in DC Comics, and I think she's been pretty underutilized, although they did do her a little bit of justice in Suicide Squad and The Suicide Squad. The comedy was really on point. I am a fan of Ryan Reynolds, but I can understand for a lot of people that his charisma and constant one-liners can be a little overwhelming for a film that's not Deadpool, but I thought they kept his jokes pretty contained here. He riffed and improv'd when he could, but it wasn't overwhelming for the script. There was some genuinely funny moments in here. One thing that I always hate about superhero films is how most superheroes just wear these little masks and nobody can tell who they are. So I like how they really played on that trope in this scene.
How did you know it was me?
What do you mean? I've known you my whole life. I've seen you naked. You don't think I would recognize you because I can't see your cheekbones?
In the midst of juggling those tones, I like how they used the theme of fear. Hal Jordan's dad died in a pretty nasty plane crash right in front of him when he was a kid.
Emotional, damn it!
And instead of that straying him away from doing what his dad did, he followed in his footsteps and became a pilot as well, and pretty much just became like a very reckless, cocky adrenaline junkie. And the overall perception of him is that he is fearless, but we come to find out through the film that that's the farthest from the truth. That theme was nailed home pretty good. But let's go ahead and get into what's going on with my phone.
Wait a second, this isn't my video, but since I'm here, let me give you my 2 cents on Green Lantern.
Yeah, boy.
The best thing easily is Ryan Reynolds as Hal Jordan and Mark Strong as Sinestro. I think they set up Sinestro pretty well as the villain for the sequel that's never gonna happen, but I think Sinestro himself is just one of the better characters in the whole movie. He's confident, driven, fearless, and just gives off the feeling of a leader, but also slightly flawed, like how he's so dismissive of Hal because he missed his mentor and friend. And he wants what's best for the Green Lantern's Corps, even if it means doing something as dangerous as trying to harness the power of fear. It's just a shame that he doesn't have more screen time. I think Mark Strong did a pretty good job with what he was given. Now as for Ryan Reynolds, he usually plays himself in every movie, and really it's just slightly different versions of himself, and here it's no different. But I'm actually okay with that. Here he's not his overly annoying and obnoxious version of himself, he's his more arrogant version here. So his jokes and type of humor that he's known for isn't overbearing, and I personally don't mind because I think he has a naturally likable personality, which makes it pretty easy for me to watch and get behind him on screen. I think how much you like Ryan Reynolds will affect how much you like Hal Jordan here, which is a plus for me because I think Ryan Reynolds' charisma elevates Hal Jordan in this movie a little bit for me. Because in this movie, he's a pretty basic character. He's an arrogant, cocky, and irresponsible guy, thrown into a situation that he can't run away from, and must overcome his fear and become the hero he's meant to be deep down. He's rather basic and has a pretty simple character arc, but because he's played by such a charismatic actor, you end up liking his character even though he's not the most complex. Okay, that's all I gotta say. I'm leaving you alone now, Eddie.
Okay, that was weird. I don't know what just happened, but let's go ahead and get into the bad stuff. The one thing that I would have to point out is something that I did not remember this film for being, but this film is super relationship heavy, and honestly, it seemed a little familiar, so I wanted to go back and look to see who directed and produced this thing, and it was none other than good old Greg Berlanti. And if that name sounds familiar to you, it's because he produces a lot of the Arrowverse shows from Arrow, Flash, Supergirl, pretty much all of them he is a producer on. So suddenly when I figured that out, that underlying relationship story all made sense. I like both of them as separate characters, but could have done without their relationship for this film, to be honest. If you take their relationship out, the majority of the movie still holds the same. And in the good stuff section, I complimented this movie for how well it was paced. But towards the middle, things got a little bit wacky. In order to keep that pace very steady, they very clearly chopped a lot of scenes out. Some of these cuts in this film are very jarring. In an ideal world for a movie, the scene prior sets up the next scene in a cool, interesting, or at least bare minimum cohesive way. And towards the middle, that just stopped happening completely. It got very, very messy, very, very choppy. It was some parts during the middle of this movie where I thought that I zoned out and missed something, and I had to rewind it because the cut just didn't make sense. And speaking of how it was directed and edited, man, this movie had big Michael Bay vibes. And I know a lot of people rag on Michael Bay and they say he's all style over substance. But there's been tons of directors and film studios who have tried to copy his style, and it just comes off as a cheap copy. This film tried to copy that, even down to the rotating slow camera style that he made popular in Transformers and Bad Boys in pretty much every movie he's ever done. And in trying to mimic the style, it just came out as spectacle when it should have been more focused on a character-driven story. You meet Hal Jordan's family in this movie, but they're in it for 4 seconds. We don't know any of their motivations. We don't know how any of their relationships are. And I think that was a really missed opportunity. And there is a lot of things happening at once in this film. You got the scientist turning into a villain. There's Amanda Waller conducting secret studies, there's the Sinestro setup, there's the weird big head Guardian character, there's the Parallax storyline, and then there's the underlying relationship story, and all the lore they're trying to build with the Lantern Corps, and none of the stories really connected together very well. And the few that they tried to make connect together, like how the scientist guy had a crush on Ryan Reynolds' love interest in this film, none of those things were just ever really explored because there was so much going on. And my biggest gripe about the film has to be the exposition.
Millions of years ago, a race of immortals harnessed the most powerful force in existence, and Aben Sur was capable of capturing and imprisoning this beast.
His only words were, "It's parallax."
There is much of which you are not aware, Sinestro.
The induction process. It activates the ring's higher function.
With a character like Green Lantern with so much lore and so much history, there's so much that general audiences who don't read or care about comic books don't know. They should have just made this a Hal Jordan character study, but it wasn't. We got all this lore, and in order to get all this lore, it has to be given to us through speeches and exposition. The movie was pretty decent for the first third, but that final leg of the movie is where this movie really fell off. It seemed very, very rushed and anticlimactic. And maybe it's just me and my cynical brain, but I feel like a movie that juggled such dark tones, for it to end as cookie cutter and generic as it did, was just a little disappointing, man. And like I said, very anticlimactic. And although it was an entertaining film, I still don't really know what the story was about. I didn't really like how he became Green Lantern. It wasn't based on anything he did or achieved. It was just that he has something deep down that the ring sees. I feel like that was a really missed opportunity for some deep dive into the character of Hal Jordan. But anyways, let's get into the final. Bro, what is happening? Damn, boy!
Yeah, I know I said I'm gonna leave you alone, but I lied, so I'm gonna chime in again. I think it's easier to ask what isn't wrong with this movie, because there's a lot, but the worst for me personally is easily how underutilized the concept of the ring is, and how underwhelming it feels when it's being used. The ring is only limited by the mind of the person who wields it, but this shit is pretty lackluster, especially towards the end with the big battles that fail to deliver. I thought the training sequence demonstrating the ring's power was pretty neat, and so was the scene saving the Senator, but when it comes to the actual fight scenes with it, I was left wanting more. They didn't get as creative as I hoped they would. There was so much they could have done with the concept, and could have utilized the ring's powers in combat more, but they didn't. I think if they had some very fun, creative action sequences, it would have made up for the very bland and generic story. And it also doesn't help that the CGI overall bounces between looking pretty decent to looking like ass, and that's even by 2011 standards. Iron Man, Captain America, The Incredible Hulk, and Thor all came out years before this movie did, and look way better. So for me, that's one of the worst aspects of the movie. Although at times it was pretty entertaining, either from it being genuinely fun, or unattendedly hilarious and stupid. I think this movie is more so just underwhelmingly safe and not as creative as the concept of the Green Lantern's core, and the ring allows it to be. Third act is rushed, the antagonists are underdeveloped and boring. Was it that bad? Well, it's not the worst superhero movie I've ever seen, but it's definitely up there. I think it's more so safe, bland, generic, and underwhelming. Okay, I'm out of here for real this time. Thanks for having me.
My phone is really bugging, so let's just get into the final thoughts. And by the way, I don't take Rotten Tomato critic scores to heart because they can be so inflated and influenced. But for the sake of this video and this series, we are debating what the critics felt about this film. And the critics on Rotten Tomatoes on average gave this a 26%. And honestly, the audience score wasn't much higher with a 45%. And although I think this film has a crap ton of problems, I don't think that I could get away with rating it as a 26. IMDb has this thing rated around a 5, and that's probably where I would rank it. Around a 5, a 5.5, just a very middle of the pack, average blockbuster film. All in all, this is what I would call a popcorn flick. It's not much depth to it. It's not much depth to the characters in it. Most of it is pretty surface level, and it was kind of just made to make you ooh and ah at the special effects and CGI happening on the screen. How do you feel about the 2011 film Green Lantern? Do you think it is a 2 or a 3 out of a 10, or a 39% like the Metacritic gave it, or a 26% like Rotten Tomatoes gave it, or are you around where I am and IMDb is with a middle of the pack 5 out of 10? Maybe you love this movie and thought it was a 8, a 9, or a 10. Let me know down in the comments. And also feel free to request some other bad movies for me to do in this series. But anyways, it's your boy Eddie Knights, and I'm out.